everyone, welcome back. It's Christine again with the Artist Pod. So Photoshop is an incredible program. It has a lot of really powerful tools and features to help create digital art. So I specifically use a Wacom Intuos Pro tablet with the Wacom stylus, and I draw straight into Photoshop. So what I'm going over today are the tools and features that will help you get started doing digital art and digital painting as quickly as possible. And in future videos, we'll be going over some of the other tools. So let's get arting. So when you're first going into Photoshop, you're looking for this icon right down here. You're just going to click that. And it'll take a few seconds to sort of load up everything. And you should come to a screen that looks something like this. What's convenient about this is if you're working on a project, it's very easy to go back however far this is and click on whatever thing you want to open without having to go find that file again. So the first thing you're going to do if you're starting from scratch is you're going to go to File and New, and that's going to pop this screen up. So this one I use pretty frequently. The 15 by 18 at 300 ppi is set for Merch by Amazon sort of size, and it tends to scale nicely with Shirtly or Printful or whatever print-on-demand provider I use. With Photoshop, it is a pixel-based system as opposed to Illustrator, which is a vector-based system. And what that means is I can't take something that's small and make it bigger, not very easily, not without it pixelating, or basically it'll appear blurry. And so I much prefer to work bigger and then make it smaller if I need to. But you can see over here is how it's set. It's 15 by 18 and it's set to inches at 300 resolution, basically, which is great. That's what I want. I want to finish it at RGB, although you can switch the mode inside. I can change this if I want to. If I don't want to do inches, I can set it to pixels. Where this comes in handy is you'll see it often on a lot of the designs on a lot of the recommendations from like Merch by Amazon or any YouTube banners or things like that. It'll say, you need your image needs to be 4500 by 2500. This is what they mean. Right? So this is where you would set that up, and that's where I would go, is I'd go straight to the pixels instead of inches, and I'd change that specific size here. But for now, we're going to leave it as inches, and we're just going to come down here and hit Create. And that takes us to this screen. So there's a whole lot on Photoshop that you can do, a lot of really powerful features, which is why I love it. So first things first, I'm going to talk a little bit about what's happening over here, right? So we have, the layer that's active, which right now there's only one. It's the background layer. And if you see this little symbol here, it means it's locked. So if I want to unlock it, I can just hit it, and now you can see it's layer 0. It's no longer background, so it's no longer locked. If I wanted to delete a layer, which I just relocked it basically, I can't do that, but I would hit this delete, the little trash can here, deletes a layer out. I would just select the right layer. This button creates a layer, so when I click it, you can see it creates one. So if I wanted to delete that, I can hit this, delete layer 1, yes, and I'm back to where I started. Just make sure you're deleting the right layer. If you have a whole bunch going on and you need to delete layer 2, don't accidentally delete layer 3. You want to make sure you select the right one. It's just a matter of clicking that on or off, and then I can delete as needed. Now if I did it wrong and I realized I really needed to delete layer 1, I can come up here to this history section, and I can literally click back one spot, and layer 2 is back. I'm back right before the action I took to delete a layer. So this history is very useful. I use it all the time. Every time I'm designing, I'm using it. It's just a quick way to erase something without erasing it when I'm making a bunch of marks on the paper or undoing something if you've made a mistake. And I can go forward if I wanted to. Oh, I did want to delete layer 2. I can just re-click on that unless I did something different. So if I came here and then opened a new layer, you can see it deletes that delete layer option. I can no longer go back to that history. It sort of overwrites it. There is a limit to how far this goes, though. So if you do a whole lot of actions and then you think you don't like any of them, you sort of lose the ability to go back. But so far, except to return to the beginning. But I do want a layer here. So typically when I'm designing, the first thing I do is I turn one of these layers black. And to do that, I'm going to, as I've already done, hit the new layer button. And I'm going to come up here to edit and I'm going to come down here to fill. And right now it's set to foreground color, but I can change that to whatever I want, as you can see. So we're going to select black, and I'm going to hit OK. And now I want to make sure that I start a new layer, because if I draw on the black, layering is very important with Photoshop. So right now if I drew on the black, let's say I just do a thing, and I think, gosh, I didn't want that there, and I hit this move button to position it somewhere else, I move the entire layer, because this gray is not separate from the black, and you always want to make sure it is. So I need to come back to that fill section, start a layer, and then make the squiggles. And now I can move those without moving the background. It's separate. And ideally in Photoshop you want to keep them separate. All right, so we're going to start a new layer. If I were just jumping in, I would hit this button right over here. It's part way down, and it looks like a brush. It's your brush tool. Now I mentioned that I use a Wacom Intuos Pro tablet, so that means I can just start drawing on my tablet, because I've sort of set everything up the way I want. But over here, you have a ton of brush options, different types of brushes, wet media, special effects, those sorts of things. I typically stick to the hard round pressure size, and I leave my size at 15, but you can see you can change the size here with the slider or up here. All of these allow you to change it. You can also come into brush settings, and you can sort of set up different things. So I have the shape dynamics and the smoothing clicked. I'm going to come back to brushes. And then up here, my mode is normal, opacity is 100%, so especially because I'm a shirt designer, I don't want the opacity to change based on my pin pressure. What I actually have it set to is to change my brush size based on pin pressure, not my opacity, because, you can't print something at half opacity on a t-shirt. It doesn't work, because the printer can't print something at half. And so I changed the size, and then I used the size to help me add the shadows and the highlights. Down here is your eraser tool. Now, if you're using a Wacom tablet with their stylus, if you just flip the stylus backwards, you have an eraser. So I don't often use the eraser tool because I don't need it. It's on the back of my pin anyway. The other thing that the eraser does that I tend to stay away from, and the reason I don't often like using it at all, is the eraser lessens the opacity of whatever you're erasing by default. And so unless I want to make sure, basically if I'm using it, I want to make sure I erase it fully, and so I will fully put the pressure to erase it in. Typically when I'm erasing it, I'll use some of the select tools, but we can get into some of that later. So when I'm talking about changing the pin size, right, like this is very thin. You can see how thin that is, right? And then if I want to make it thicker, I would come and press, and you can see that thickens up that line. See how that's doing that? Thicken it up and then release that pin pressure. And that's what I have mine set to do. Now, if you were drawing and you really liked how this was turning out, but you needed two of them, you can actually come back to this layer, right? I'm drawing on layer 2. And I can drag it down to this new layer button and release it. And that makes a copy of that layer. So if I want to move one of those, this very top button is your move tool. I can now move it, and now I have two of them. If I don't like the look of one of the layers though, say I just wanted to copy that layer to preserve it so that I can do something to the copy of without necessarily messing up my drawing, I can just hit this little I button, and that hides that layer, right? Like I can flash that on and off. I can also change the layer order by dragging and dropping, which isn't important for this, but is oftentimes very important. If I double click, I can rename my layers. Gray 1. Now, I'm not somebody who typically renames layers, but it can be very useful, and I get myself into a few binds sometimes where I'm going through trying to remember what layer I put what on, and I'm just clicking layers on and off while I scroll down, trying to find which layer is the right layer. So if you want to keep yourself organized, just left click, double click, and type in whatever name you want. And then, just click away and it'll take. So the last thing I'm going to really talk about in this video is this button here. This is your zoom in and out tool. So I can press and hold and it'll zoom in, but that's not really the way I like to use it. If I left click, hold my left click and scroll to the right, I zoom in, and it'll specifically zoom in on the center of where that is. And if I want to zoom out, what I really like about that is if I do the same thing, I scroll to the right, and instead I click and hold it and scroll to the left, it'll zoom out. And you can see it sort of remains centered. So even though my mouse is moving to the left and right, it's keeping me somewhat centered here. When you zoom in like that, you'll start having these bars on the side and the bottom. Once you can no longer see the full thing, see they will go away. You see they're gone now because I'm all the way back out. You can also just single click. If I just left click, I will zoom in slowly. But I like the control of doing this. Typically, if you're designing though, and you see that something's blurry, just clicking will put it in focus. So that's another little trick. If you think, gosh, why is my thing blurry? Sometimes it's blurry because it's not really sized in a way that Photoshop wants to read it well. And just left clicking your zoom will often fix that. It's not that your subject's blurry, it's that Photoshop's rendering it that way, the way that you're seeing it. And then I guess that wasn't the final thing. The last thing I will say is if you are trying to, if you're working in Photoshop, you create this great image, the last thing you want to do then is to save it, and that's just under File, Save As, and then, make sure it's set to Photoshop, and type in, put it wherever you want. Basically save it how you would any file. So you can do it as Photoshop, you can do it as JPEG. PNG, if you ever save it as a PNG, you want to make sure that you erase the background first, or unselect them so they're not visible, and then I can save it as a PNG with no background. That's what you're going to want to use when you're saving files for, shirts, because you don't want the background in place. But we're not going to save that because I don't need it. So if you're done with a file, you don't want it anymore, you can just hit this X button. It's going to ask if you want to save a document before closing it. I'm going to say no, and we're back where we started. All right, so I hope that was helpful in getting you feeling more comfortable with Photoshop. And in future videos, I'll be talking about some of the other really powerful features that it has. In some cases, there's some tools that I use all the time that we didn't go over in this particular video. So that's coming up next. In the floating nether next to me, I have videos of other art tutorials I've done. So I will see you all soon. Thank you so much. Take care.